The goal of the show is to help you break in and thrive in advertising. And that could be the aspiring advertising professional looking to break in and find their first agency job, or this could be for the mid level professional looking to break through and find that next promotion. And this could also be for the marketing professionals that are poking around and looking to see who their next potential agency partner might be. We do this by sharing the stories and advice of those rocking it on the other side. And this week, we have a fun episode with Dave Schiff. Dave Schiff is the founder and creative director at Standard Practice. I loved talking with Dave. It is a long, but such a fun episode. He is an interesting human. He talks about how he broke into advertising. He talks about how he started Standard Practice. I mean, before Standard Practice, he ran an agency called Made. And before that, he was working at Crispin Porter and Bogusky. He talks about how he broke into advertising, which started writing satirical newsletters at Schwinn Bicycles, getting poached by Crispin Porter Bogusky and worked under Alex Bogusky, who's a dream guest of ours. And he gets into some Hall of Fame campaigns, I would say, including work for Lyft and their rise against Uber early in their days of Lyft when they were trying to get their brand voice out there, petition to declare men as an endangered species for Maxim magazine, and probably one of my favorites is the Coke Zero campaign that dared to ask, what if Coke sued itself? So plenty of stories, plenty of insights, and we learn about Standard Practice and their positioning as an ad agency, independent, based in Colorado. You're going to love this episode. He is a veteran. There, a treasure trove of lessons, I would say, on how to break in, how to thrive in this industry, and then push the limits of creativity and then execute on them. Check out www.standardpractice.us. You'll see their positioning there. It's fun. It's clear. It's no nonsense. They're just in it for the creative work itself, and we love that. If you want to connect with Dave, you can find more on the website, listen to this episode, connect with him on LinkedIn. Go ahead and leave us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts and on Spotify. That just helps us continue to get amazing guests like Dave on the show. I know you're going to enjoy this one. I had a lot of fun. Now on with the show. This is the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast, and as usual, I'm your accomplice, Gino Schellenberger. Kick it, Mikey. All right, Dave Schiff, welcome to the Breaking and Entering Advertising Podcast. How are you doing today, my friend?
You know, I think the usual answer is something like, I'm excited to be here. You know, thanks for having me. And like, I don't feel any of that. Like, I'm appreciative of the opportunity, but as I go into most things in life, I have this overwhelming sense of doom. Like, I feel like this is going to be like an unmitigated disaster. And
I
so
love that.
that's how I'm doing.
Do you do that for every campaign, every project you're working on?
Yes.
You think it's going to be a disaster?
And I tell clients, like, I tell them, listen, like, if you give us this assignment, or if we win this pitch, or if we get this business, my first reaction is going to be sheer terror. And by the way, that's not what they want to hear. Like, they're coming to you to solve their problems. But then I qualify it by saying, look, it's not that I don't think we can do this. It's just I understand the responsibility, and it scares the shit out of me. And by the way, any agency you hire that isn't scared doesn't fucking care enough, like, or doesn't understand what's at stake, right? Because it starts with their jobs, their business. So I'm not saying you get, you freeze like a deer in the headlights, but yes, to answer your question, it wouldn't make a great Dr. Seuss book. Like, I go into everything like with sheer terror.
I love it. Well, that's good stress though. That gets you, that makes sure you make sure that you're trying extra hard so it doesn't fail.
You know what though? It's true. And like, we tell clients, like, when we start an assignment and there's that fear, it's almost always accompanied by a commensurate euphoria when you get it right. Right. And so like, but that pressure creates, the drive to try to get to something great. So totally agree.
Love it. So we're here to talk about you. I can't wait to learn about standard practice, like just from the agency website. Right at the headline is what we do is nothing new. I love that because Dave, I'll be honest with you, I've done 300 plus of these interviews, like
Yeah.
350. I've heard every single like agency positioning statement on this show. I've heard we care about making brave creative work and disrupting meaningfully a
Yes.
thousand
Yeah.
times.
Yeah.
uh
Well,
so this is
look,
so refreshing.
I would love to say that, that was our vision from the outset, or at least for me, that was something I espoused from day one. But the reality is, for 11 years, I founded an agency called Made, and it had a
Mhm.
thing. And the thing was, we're going to try to focus our work on companies that build things in the US. And, we can help job creation, and we can cut down on all of the shipping that happens between countries. And it wasn't like full on anti-globalist, but to your point, it was a thing. And you know what we found out, within about like 3 months, it was like no one gives a shit about our mission. The people coming to us, what they care about? Keeping their job, helping their business. If they're a founder, like getting another round of seed money. Are you any good at this? That's all they care about. And
Yeah.
so we de-emphasized the made in US part of the business. And that's just the reality is, I'm not against, like, it's cool if you're passionate about something, but to expect your clients to prioritize it the same way you do is ridiculous. They just want to know, can you help our business? So yeah, standard practice is like, we're an agency. We do advertising and strategy and creative, and it's hard. And we don't have a patented process or, like some, angle. It's just, that's what we do. So,
You don't have a proprietary AI internal software that gets big data
right.
insights.
Dude, I love and I know that some clients want to see it, or it makes them comfortable, but even just like the old creative, like when I was at Crispin Porter, that's where I started my career. And I remember, sometimes I would speak and I would present work that we had done at advertising things. And we had a process. I never used it. I didn't even know it existed. And it was just like a thing with arrows pointing to other stuff, which in turn had additional arrows that went to other things. And it was like, this is how we arrive at ideas. And it's like, really? Because I think what it is we just stare into space. We try to do something that's vaguely connected to the strategy. And that's, no one wants to see that on the slide, no client, but that was the reality. So even like anyone that tries to templatize this, it's always just so laughable. It's just, fuck, that's what's so frustrating about it. I understand the frustration, right? Because it's this ephemeral thing that you can't quantify, and people are going to pay like very specific quantities of money for it. And so,
Mhm.
that's all. I think that's always been the tension in it.
Yeah. And also it's like I get like having some sort of mission mantra, like processes when you're scaling and you're getting like 200, 300 employees, like a North Star of some sort. I guess
Yeah.
like is there an argument to be made there for those agencies that do this type of stuff when they're scaling up?
Look, whatever you got to do, like, this is
Yeah.
such a hard business.
Yeah.
Like, I don't care what you do, what you call yourself, if you have to wear weird hats, like, if it works and you
Yeah.
can run a business and help clients, man, hats off. And so I think it's understandable when there's an opportunity and the opportunity can help your business, as long as you're not letting your mission supersede your ability to help businesses, right? And
Yep.
that's, you see clients do that all the time. Like, at Made, we worked on Lyft, right? And one of the things that Lyft was doing when we met them was, first of all, they were getting their ass kicked by Uber. That's the first thing they were doing. But one of the things they were doing is elevating their mission. And they were like, if you spoke to them, they would tell you stuff like, listen, if we can get more people in fewer cars, we can change the way American cities are built so that they're built around human infrastructure instead of automotive infrastructure. And that's really cool. Except what if I just want to go 8 blocks that way? Right? Like I
Yeah.
don't want just I got to get to a meeting. And Uber was telling people, "Hey, we'll get you there in a black car. It's kind of awesome." And so, when your mission, starts to overshadow your product or service, you're doing yourself, you're putting yourself in a bad position as a business.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense and some good learnings here. So I guess, can you tell me more about standard practice then? So we got a little bit of insight on what we do is nothing new, right? Listening
Yeah.
and learning about your business. I'm reading here. It's standard practice to you all. It's not groundbreaking. I love this stuff here. So you worked at Made before, which is an agency, and now
Yes.
standard practice. Can you give me a little bit of a rundown? I believe it says here about a year ago this launched. Is that correct?
Yeah. And I mean, I will tell you unapologetically that standard practice might be the least visionary agency in terms of like setting a model and like having a vision. The bottom line is this. I was working at Made, I founded Made. We made it 11 years. I did a negligent amount of self-promotion, never entered a show, which was decidedly different than Crispin, where, everything you did, like you could send an internal memo and it would get entered in the show, and but we got by 11 years on word of mouth. But what we really did was, and I noticed this, like when I was at CPB, I had 60 creatives in my group. Like that's just creative. So when you think
Wow.
about, traffic people and all the support and account and strategy, like that's like a medium-sized agency within
Right
the
there.
agency,
Totally.
and so what would happen is we would put everybody on stuff that was big. And so you'd get this huge stack of ideas. And you realize that it was the same 10 people coming up with the ideas every time. And that's not to say that the other people were there was anything wrong with them. They just weren't as talented. That's just the truth. And so, at Made, over the years, I ended up, with a creative department that was essentially that, right? It was like if you took those 10 people and that was all you had. And so we were fast, we were good, we were strategically disciplined, and everybody, after working that long together, knew all the basics, right? Like if a client, if you're in a round one and a client is criticizing, don't fold up like a cheap lawn chair and then passive aggressively do new versions that demonstrate how stupid their feedback is. Like take the feedback to heart, right? A lot of times it makes the work better. Shit like that, right? Stuff that, so you didn't have to explain that, right? So you have this tight group of people that all can make like good work. And so what happened was with Made, we had after 11 years, we'd had an opportunity to keep going, right? We had people offering to invest. We had clients offering to give us additional work. But the reality was, I couldn't look out and see how our model was going to not avoid getting in the same position it had,
Mhm.
2 years later. It was
Right.
just, and so also the guys that I just described, and they're all members of standard practice. They had kind of like topped out, right? So they're all, and this is, listen, this is me saying this, and I'm obviously biased, but having been around great creatives, I can tell you like any one of these 4 guys could probably run a big creative department at a big shop, right? They're just, so there's nowhere left for them to go unless it's leave and go to a big shop or start your own business. And so, you know, rather than continue Made, I closed it. I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do next. I didn't make enough money to retire, but I made enough to be deliberative and maybe take some time off. And then people started asking us, even though clients we had never worked on before started asking us, would you help with this or would you help with that? And so like a couple months in, I mean, it became a bit. We didn't even have a name. And so we would tell clients like, look, as part of the interaction, you can name the agency. Like, and so we had no
Love.
office, which was like not an option pre-pandemic, because
Mhm.
the office was part of the Dog and Pony Show where, and by the way, I'm in our new office and you can see how ornate it is. But really the purpose of an office is very different now. I think it's not to like impress your clients, it's to get together in those times when you have to. But anyway, we didn't have a name, we didn't have a website, and finally we were like, should we just go ahead and pick a name and do some CI and have a website? And so we did that. And there's nothing like, I shouldn't even tell you that or say that, because, a cooler story would be like, well, we saw an opportunity for, boutique agencies increasingly are replacing AORs and there's rosters of these shops. Like, none of that. We didn't fucking think of any of that. We were just like, look, we're good at this. We like to work together. People are asking us for help. And after a while, you're like, shit, we're on a roll. Let's just lean in. And it's great. And that's the compelling Harvard Business Review case study of standard practice.
Love it.
Like,
Love it.
You're like backed into a shop, zero forethought.
I
But
love
having said that, like we did say, to your point up front, we don't need a thing. Let's just do what we've always done, right? Let's work hard for our clients. Let's try to help their business, and let's treat every one of them as though they're Apple or Nike or Under Armour or Lyft. And so that's what we did.
Love it. So then what were some of those like foundational clients then? I think you mentioned Lyft. Was that made?
Yeah. There
Carrying over for standard practice, what were some of those foundational clients?
Some of the big ones were Lyft was a huge one, right? And it was awesome because at the time we didn't have any name that anyone had heard of, and Lyft was a pitch, and so we just thought, okay, let's give it a shot. Let's jump in there. They let us in the pitch, and it was great because, in the beginning, when you're pitching something, if you're not familiar with the product, you got to use the product and kind of at least see what its deal is, see what it's all about. And this is at a time when rideshare was still pretty new. So most people's parents didn't even know what rideshare was and hadn't heard of Uber or Lyft. If you were urban and tech savvy, you probably knew Uber, you might have known Lyft, but Lyft was getting crushed, just for the context. So, and the reason they were getting crushed was Uber had won the acquisition battle early on. And like, if you tried to get an Uber, they'd show up in like 5 minutes. If you tried to get a Lyft, it's like 9 minutes. And that's an eternity, right? So they had to acquire drivers and riders really fast. So anyway, they put their business up, and they ran a pitch. And we have a guy, Steve Dolan, who's a creative director here and a partner, and he came up with the idea of, well, why don't we just, and why don't you? It was really convenient because he suggested that I do it, which was, so I'm the one that gets to fucking do this. But we took Lyft from Boulder to San Francisco. And you couldn't just take one, like you couldn't just, plug in the address in San Francisco and they pick you up. So we ended up getting a driver that agreed to take us as far as New Mexico. And then we had to go around Nevada because it was so early on in rideshare that Lyft wasn't, licensed to opeate in Nevada. So,
oh my goodness.
Yeah, we go, and I mean, there were times when the drivers would pull up and see us and then just keep driving because they thought there was something weird going on. But we took Lyft to Lyft through Palm Springs all the way up. And when we got to, and the whole time we were doing it, we were shooting, we were talking to the drivers, we were just filming ourselves. It was just me in the car, and there was one producer there. And then we would take those files and upload them that day. And so we had a little site, a little blog site that was chronicling the journey. And Lyft had no idea we were coming, but we were tagging them. And as we're getting closer, they're starting to watch. And like, really, it's one of the things that won us the pitch. Like when I got there, like one of the top people there was like, are you guys trying to win this now? Like, you kind of already did, right? So yeah, it was awesome. It was really awesome.
That's so fun. Nice.
And then the work was really, really satisfying and smart, I think. Like I hate that I said that, by the way. When someone says like it's smart work, don't you, that's like the biggest D-bag thing. All right, so I rescind that. But the work was, it was trying to do some different things. At first, I don't know if you remember, but Lyft had like those fuzzy pink mustaches on the cars. And it was like the kooky fun one. Right. But like, you don't want to go to a fucking business meeting. It's a great thing to take to Burning Man. Right. But like going to a business meeting and getting out of that. So they weren't grown up in terms of their look and feel and vibe. And so, and the other thing that hadn't happened, and there's a lot of research that says this, is that when you're the first to stand up for a new category, you usually win, even though technically advertising for the whole category, so that's supposed to help all your peers.
Yeah. First mover advantage, is that what they call it?
Yeah, maybe. It sounds right.
First Uber advantage.
Okay, so no one had stood up for ride hailing. And look, man, think about it. Like now it's normal, but back then it's like, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to get in strangers' cars and they're going to drive you around. That's the fucking thing my mom told me never to do. It's like, it's a business model, right? So it was still pretty weird and people hadn't described it. And it's not just, that's the thing. It's not just getting in cars. It's a new transportation system. So we did some initial work that basically was in 6 cities. We took the subway system and then we superimposed it with like 1 million new magenta routes. And it was like, a gajillion new stops, shit like that. And the idea was, this is a transportation system, and it's a new way to get around, and it's pretty groundbreaking. And that work also it was very clean, very tech oriented, but not soulless. And it retained that kind of magenta they have. So it retained the optimism of the brand. The next thing we did was like, where are you going to steal share from? Well, you would think Uber, and we got there eventually, but the first thing you should try to steal share from, and it's what we did, is, well, what's your biggest competitor? It's people driving around in their own cars, at least in urban environments. So we did a bunch of stuff that was basically positing the notion that driving is not really that great. I mean, there's road rage and gridlock and your car breaks down and you can get DUIs and there's a bunch of shit that sucks about driving. So I'm gonna give you an example of a good one. We did long copy billboards, right? And we weren't the first to do this. There were many long copy billboards back in the day, but these billboards were really meant for you to read the whole thing. And the reason we knew you could do that is we bought them. The media buy was along all the most congested roads, right? So like the 405 in California. And without, I can tell you what they bet. The headline was on one of the best ones, "This is a bad sign," obviously referring to the execution itself, but and it's like most billboards have 4 or 5 words, this one has 90. And the fact that you've read this many of them in the middle of the road is a sign that something's gone wrong. And then it goes on to say, look, we're not saying we can solve it, but we got a pretty good idea. And if you download the app, you'll have it too. So and here's the best part of this. A local news crew sends out a team, and their angle is, these are dangerous billboards because there's too many words on them and they could create accidents as people try to read them. They're interviewing a guy, right? And it's on the shoulder, and he's a driver. He's in his car. He's talking through the window to the reporter. And she's like, do you think these billboards are dangerous? And he said, no. And she said, would you even read this many words? And he's like, I'm reading them right now. And then when they pan back, I mean, it's almost like this could have been guerrilla for the campaign. They pull back. He's not on the shoulder. He's in gridlock, literally stopped. And she's interviewing him because he can't fucking drive. Like, he can't move. And so it was
Love that.
great. So we stole share from driving, that was the goal. And then the final piece, eventually at the very end, and this was honestly, the investors wanted to go after Uber. Like, we felt like, man, we've created this pretty like I don't know, it's a very kind, open, altruistic feeling brand. It doesn't feel like an attack brand, but there was a lot of desire among the investors to go after Uber. So we're like, all right, and this is hardly a novel idea, but we're like, it can't be Lyft attacking Uber. We got to just make a fake company that everyone knows is Uber and have them attack us, right? So I mean, that's not an original thought, but it was really fun work. And basically we made sure the pitfall there is you don't want to do the advertising for the fake company. You want to do it for your brand. So
Right.
we looked online, we found Travis, the founder at Uber at the time, was in the news for controversial stuff, and we also found like the inside of their office, and I swear it looked like MI5. It was like, we modeled it after like a combination of a corporate headquarters and what you see in Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. And it was like the best casting ever because it's just three white dudes that are just terrible people. Like, and I'm not saying they're terrible people because they're white dudes, but
Right.
like basically it was like reflective of their culture. But each spot started out with, like, for instance, there was one about tipping, and it was like,
That one cracked me up.
yeah. And by the way, not long after we ran that, so you could tip in the Lyft app, but you couldn't tip in the Uber app. And so after that ran, Uber started allowing tipping, right? And we knew we were making a difference. And that's where the real hockey stick happened with brand perception. And it's crazy when you think about it. People talk about like how products get commoditized, but like think about this. A lot of times back then, I think it still happens, but at least back then, people drove for both. So it's literally the same product, the same car, the same person. The only difference is the interface. But like we created such a different vibe, and we kind of wove in the optimism and the ethos of Lyft, and the way we kind of handled that it was the same car was like, look, we tip like Lyft drivers tip. A lot of times they're more friendly, they're more laid back. So it's like the driver's almost off the clock when he's doing a Lyft, and then when he gets Uber, he's got to go back into servant mode. And it was great because we tripled rides over the course of 1 year. Our goal was like when there was a New York Times or Wall Street Journal article about ride share, it would be like ride sharing companies like Uber, they never mentioned Lyft. And by the time we were done, it was like ride share companies like Uber and Lyft. And so they achieved parity in terms of arrival times. They were in the conversation. And then here's what I'll tell you about the fickle nature of advertising. We crushed every metric, right? Knocked it out of the park. The work was fantastic. I really wish we would have entered some, but we'd entered none of it, right? And having been around award-winning work and had the good fortune to make a bunch of that myself, a bunch of that stuff would have won, but we never entered it. But the bigger point was this: we did so well that the woman who was CMO was poached to be CEO at another company. So she gets picked out of there and gets to be a CEO somewhere else. And the incoming CEO was like super good friends with a bunch of people at Wyden. And like, I'm not, and so they were like, do you guys want to pitch against Wyden for the business? And it's like, no, we've been working on it for a year. We tripled rides. You can see the reception to the work and how good it is. You already know what we can do. And this is kind of doomed from the outset. And this is a common thing. I'm not acrimonious about it. I got nothing against Wyden, and I got nothing against the incoming CMO who was friends with them. I understand. But It's just really hard when you do everything, not just right, but you crush it and you still end up losing a client. And that's just the nature of advertising.
Totally. I think it's so great though that the CMO got a job opportunity because of the amazing work.
It was really good to be a part of it. And, on their side, they really did the thing that's hard to find, which is they bought off on things that were unusual and risky and non-traditional. And it's so hard to find that. So, the founders are great guys, and they really do have like a worthwhile mission. But like we said in the very beginning of this, don't elevate the mission over utility. Like, just let people know, like, hey, we're a great transportation service that can get you from A to B. Oh, by the way, we have this mission. That's the way that the hierarchy of that should be.
I like that. So I want to kick it back then, Dave. How did you break into all of this? At what point in your life did you say to yourself, I want to make ads for a living?
Dude, okay, again, I don't mean to upset anyone. Like, I don't understand the people that go to ad school, and like, I have some of my best friends, right? But I remember, first of all, if someone would have told me when I was a little kid, you're going to grow up and make ads, I would have burst into tears. Like, I'm gonna ruin all the stuff I love, right? That's what I would have thought. And really, what happened was, the only thing I ever liked, and I mean, this is maybe sad. Maybe this is like something I should be talking about with a professional healthcare psychologist type person. But I just liked not fucking around. I liked messing things up. Not in a mean-spirited way, but if I saw a process, whether it was in school or somewhere else, I would often think, how can I throw a wrench into this in a way that's amusing to me? I want to make this into entertainment for myself, right?
Content,
and like, the only thing that I liked, and it's the only thing that I was any good at. And I looked out at the world as I grew up, and I thought, well, I mean, like, there's saying I was unemployable. I mean, that was an understatement. So I had no idea what I wanted to do. I ended up at a bicycle company, at Schwinn Bicycle Company, right? And I was working, answering phones, and basically a customer service guy, right? But I always loved writing. I really enjoyed writing. I enjoyed it in school. I enjoyed essay tests where you had to write under pressure. I had done none of the homework usually, but I could get a B because I would bullshit my way through. I started writing this satirical newsletter, and this is how long ago this is. It was on a typewriter. I mean, every Thursday night I would write this newsletter. And there was a bicycle industry magazine called Mountain Bike Action, and it had guys like jumping and doing cool stuff on bikes. And this was called Order Entry Action, because technically I was in inside sales, and we were just plugging in orders on our keyboard. It was like the most boring job. I'm sure it's automated now, right? And so this newsletter was really just 4 pieces of paper stapled together with typewritten articles and hand-drawn things, and maybe some things I had clipped out of magazines. And I would stay up till like 3 or 4 in the morning every Thursday night making this thing. And I didn't put my name on it, and I would put it on everyone's desk in my department. And I would get in early, and I would sit, and I would just wait. And the first time I did it, I heard these peals of laughter coming over the cubicle walls. And that was it. That's all I ever wanted. Like, I would have stopped there, right? It was a joy. But a guy came over that ran the marketing department. He was the CMO, and he said, I think you're in the wrong job. First of all, he was like, did you write this? And I was like, oh, fuck, I'm fired. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, okay, I think you're in the wrong job. So they moved me to marketing, and I became an in-house writer. I didn't even know what that was really. And the cool thing was, at the time, Schwinn was regarded, it had just been bought out of bankruptcy as a 100-year-old company. So it was regarded as a dinosaur. So they were doing crazy shit, and they were working with great agencies. And I didn't know what good agencies were, but Carmichael Lynch, and then Crispin Porter Bogusky was one of our agencies. And I was writing tons of stuff like catalogs and, anything else. But those guys would come in and do 4 print ads. That's all we could afford to have them do. So I got to see that kind of work. And eventually, Alex Bogusky was like, you should consider working in advertising, and he's like, I don't even know if you can make ads, but I think you might be able to, and we'll give you a shot. So I moved to Miami. And as I said, I started there when there was maybe 100 people, and they had just started to they had just been named Agency of the Year. And I remember, I didn't know that, right? So I'm interviewing, and someone gave me the creative agency of the year copy of creativity, and Crispin won, and I almost didn't go to the interview. I'm not kidding. I was like, they're just gonna like make fun of me, and I'm gonna feel stupid, and I don't belong here. But yeah, I went in, and they gave me a chance, and I spent 10 years there, and I got to learn from people that were so good at it, and the culture at that time was I was surrounded by people that did it the way they did it.
I'm curious. So I want to peel this back real quick, just to pause there and really digest. So you got to that in-house position at Schwinn and writing, and Crispin is agency, working with them, agency of record.
Yes.
We'll call it that. And Alex Bogusky was coming in to present or sell work to Schwinn, and you started to meet him through those interactions, and he identified you. Can we hover there on that direct?
Yeah. Well, I don't think I ever saw him personally in the building, but like Jeff Steinhauer, who was one of the primary, he was one of the 4 big partners.
Yeah.
And then some of I think Laura Bowles, who was also an account person, representatives came in. But what I think happened was, in researching the brand, they saw the catalogs I had been writing. And right. I would write the weirdest shit. I mean, these catalogs were, because I just was like, I didn't know how to write a catalog. So the catalogs I was writing, obviously it was about the product, but it was as entertaining as I could make it. Every single paragraph of like 100-page catalog, right?
And Schwinn was cool with that? Like, what was, they didn't care that much?
It's such an unusual situation. They were cool with it because at the time they really needed to be irreverent and different and youthful. And so, the kind of ads they were running, I remember there was a Carmichael headline: "Don't think of us as 100 years old, think of us as 4 25-year-olds," or "Cars suck," and back then that was like crazy to do that, and so they were undoing their image, they were redoing their product, they started making really good stuff. And my boss, Greg Bagney, who was the CMO, was crazy, and I had no idea. So we would do something like, it wasn't all. Here's an example. I put on a sandwich board, and it said, "The end is near unless your bike is cool." It's not like that's great copy. And it had a Schwinn logo, and I had a bullhorn, and I went all around Denver talking about all of the new product at Schwinn. But I was boarding city buses and talking through a megaphone, and like the drivers like, "You can't use that on the bus," like through the intercom. And I'm like, I'm just trying to spread the word about Schwinn, like back at him. So we're having an argument through the PA and the megaphone, and we got all of this on film. And then of course we get kicked off, and then we'd go to the Capitol, and the cops would get called, and we got it all on film, and then we would cut that into a thing for dealers, right? So I didn't understand that there was a place at the time, which was Crispin, that considered shit like that to be advertising. I thought advertising was what I heard on the radio and billboards, and of course it still is. So yeah, that and what happened was Alex saw a bunch of stuff I had written. I think they brought him back catalogs. And he was like, "Okay, we shouldn't even try to write the catalog because this guy's doing a pretty good job, and maybe we should offer him, we should think about bringing him in." And so that's kind of how that happened. But it was a very weird route into the business.
And any schooling or training, or you started just right into that customer service sales role at Schwinn, and then made your way?
I was the most useless. I mean, I was a classics major, right? So if there was anything that it taught me, it was to write under pressure. I mean, every test I ever took was just a blank booklet. But it wasn't, classics is like history meets politics meets philosophy meets art and architecture, is that stuff. But yeah, like that's in terms of gainful employment, like no one's ever asked me about Periclean strategy and the Peloponnesian War. So like, but I I didn't go to ad school. I wasn't really sure what I was doing. But as I said, I had the luxury of having incredible partners, a guy named Alex Bernard, another guy named Mike Del Marmol. But I can tell you the first thing I ever did, literally the first idea I ever had at Crispin, was IKEA. We had just gotten IKEA, and they gave us a brief. I'd never seen a brief. I also didn't know I was too scared to write like TV, because I would see other people's stuff and it was like open on and then like pan left and then, pull back. And I didn't know what any of those things meant. And I felt so dumb. And it took me a while to realize that that's just the window dressing. It's like, what's the idea? But the very first thing, there was this thing in the brief that said, IKEA starts with the price. So if they're going to make like an end table, they don't think like, we're going to make an end table that's roughly these dimensions and this, and it's going to look like this. Now let's go figure out how to make it inexpensively. They literally start with like, we're going to make a $19 end table and we're going to figure out how to do it. And I thought that was so weird, right? So I glommed onto that. I mean, I was so scared to write anything. I was like, okay, I can hone in on that. And so in my sketchbook, I drew a price tag, that was a billboard. So the whole billboard was a price tag. And then the furniture was an actual piece of furniture of regular scale hanging off of that price tag, like a price tag, right? And it was just flipping those things. And that ended up becoming, more than $1 million out of home campaign. That was the first thing I scribbled in my sketchbook, right? And I think it won the Grand Obie that year. For me, it was like, man, stick to that strategy, like, or that briefing document. Like, there's gonna be gold in there. And just like, sometimes it's going to be that literal of a translation. Other times it won't. And by the way, subsequent things written in my sketchbook were so bad that, the majority of it is so embarrassingly shitty that so just know that 90% of every sketchbook that I've ever filled is filled with horse shit. But yeah, that was, it ended up being an auspicious entry into the business. But I learned so much from the guys around me. So I had the benefit of being with great people.
Well, whenever I come across guests that have worked at Crispin, especially the Miami office,
yeah,
I feel like that's probably one of the most iconic advertising agencies in a period of time is Miami Crispin. I like to just hover there. What other lessons did you learn? Like, tell us some stories there, like the culture or the people, who you interacted with, biggest mistake you had. There's got to be gold in here. I just want to extract it. It's my job to spread that legacy on. I feel like.
Yeah.
So cool.
I know what you want to do. You want to dismember me in front of the rest of the industry. And I'm willing to have that happen because
I love it. Good. Yeah. That's all I want. Maybe
like through telling some story, what I learned first of all that, and it's such an unusual place to fall into. And I'll say this, like, if you were there and you were reasonably intelligent and hardworking and you had a pulse, you were going to win awards. Like, and that's because of what Alex built there and the machine that he made. And the machine primarily did this. Okay, this is very common, I think, across any industry or any endeavor. You have a weird or crazy or asymmetrical idea. And then people demonstrate to you how smart they are by telling you all the ways you can't do that idea, right? Like, hey man, that's super cool, but you probably didn't know that there was this regulation or this company did that in Czechoslovakia in 1971. That's already been done. Or it's just, all of these things come up and people listen. Normally those people have influence or power at the places they are. At Crispin, those people got fired, right? So like, it was like, look, of course the idea is not possible. If it's a good idea, none of it should be possible, right? And
Or ever
so
done before, or yeah, ever
totally,
thought of.
totally.
Yes.
Yes. And so, like, instead of spending all your energy surfacing all the reasons we can't do it, figure out how we can, right? And just that was the biggest thing ever, because it knocked down all the others. It's already so hard, you know that, right? And so it knocked down all the other stuff. And the other thing I would say is this, like, if you came up with something that was crazy that you could figure out how to execute, you also had to present a pretty great case for why it was smart from a business perspective, because nobody on the client side is like, fuck man, that's cool, that's crazy. You know what they're thinking is like, oh my God, like, you're asking me to write a check for this? Well, if you do your due diligence and you take them through a setup or a strategy that says, this is gonna make you money or gain you audience or whatever your goal is, and this is why, then you're going to sell that work, right? So people would always ask us, how do you sell these things? How do you sell these things? It's like, you don't sell them because they're crazy. You sell them because for this client in this moment in time, crazy is the most, responsible thing they can do. So that's like what I saw. But I can tell.
Any like examples? I think I recall like there was an idea that was tossed around that they wanted to like buy the moon, and then like the producers actually went through and talked to NASA and like figured out like, okay, it's legally not possible. Nobody owns the moon, but they went to NASA.
I wasn't involved in that. But I remember that. Let me tell you one that I was involved in. It was helpful for me to understand the advertising isn't what I thought it was. So it's a weird one too. And it was trying to do something very specific tactically, which also makes it an interesting case study. So Maxim magazine, this is going back, like A, it's when people read magazines, and B, when there were all these things called laddie mags, and it was like FHM, Maxim, they were kind of like these men's magazines that were like Playboy Light, and so the guy that owned most of those was a guy named Felix Dennis, and he was a publishing magnate. He was also, he was brilliant. He was also crazy. He was on 60 Minutes. At one point, he had a $3,000 a day coke habit. Like he was a wild person, but he was a poet. He lived on David Bowie's island, which he bought from David Bowie. So an eccentric guy, but what he wanted was, they weren't in Maxim. They weren't getting advertisers that were blue chip. So they weren't getting Apple and Chevy, but like Playboy magazine was getting Apple and Chevy. And so they wanted to do a campaign. Think about how kind of like weird and hard this is. They wanted to do a campaign that would attract blue chip advertisers, but they still wanted it to be like funny and irreverent. And so it was like, okay, elevated humor. You could say elevated humor was the brief. And so what we did was we kind of looked at the product and we were like, what is Maxim? And we thought it's kind of like the place you go conceptually to be a guy, right? And again, this is work from a few decades ago. So like it was a different time, and I'm not saying that it would be the thing to do now, but so it's like, look, it's man's natural habitat. That's what we came up with, is this line, man's natural habitat. And we thought about the state of men at that time. And at that time, political correctness was coming in hard. Many of the things we see today were beginning, right? And the trends. And so we thought, okay, this is a men's magazine. How are men doing? Listen, men are on the ropes. Like, in fact, men could be endangered. So we looked up the law of how to get something declared endangered. And I think it's like the 1973 Endangered Species Act. Any individual or group can petition the government to have a species declared endangered if they fill out the proper paperwork. So we got the paperwork, and it was almost like a dissertation. It was numeric, and we put real rigor into it. And it was like, you had to show like habitat loss. So we were like, look, in 1975, there were 300,000 barbershops. Now it's down to like 30,000. Meanwhile, there's a million hairstylists, which are lethal to man, like, and so it was like ridiculous, but sort of weirdly intelligent ways of making the case that men were endangered species. So we submit the document. We also put it on a website, and it was on, and you could click a button to say you
petition.
agreed and send it. Yes, the petition. You could send it to the Department of the Interior and the Department of Fish and Wildlife. Those were the two stakeholders that decide. So it crashes the Department of the Interior website. The Washington Post finds out about it and writes an article, and they interview the Department of the Interior, and they're like, is it true that you're actually looking at a document to have men declared endangered? And they're like, unfortunately, yes, like it's been submitted properly. I mean, we had an attorney go over it, and so yes, this is your tax dollars at work, but we have to do this. and so it blew up well beyond the behavior. To finish out the story, it wasn't the first time somebody had tried to have a man declared endangered. There was some environmental group that tried to have an indigenous tribe somewhere declared endangered, and ultimately they lost because it was determined that man is a domestic animal instead of a wild animal. And the attorney that represented the government in that case was Gail Norton, who is now, at the time we do this, she was the Secretary of the Interior. So she's like, okay, what the fuck, like this again? Anyway, that to me was like one of those wild, crazy behaviors that you would never, and we, it was a massive success, and they got those blue chip advertisers.
Yeah, how did it connect back? Because I've learned like this pyramid exercise, which we don't have to go through, but like really broad ideas in the middle, and then you kind of got to revert it down. Like, how did it tie back to Maxim? Petition.
Great question. So, but if you looked at it like from every stakeholder, if you're a reader of Maxim, you're like, okay, this is awesome, right? Like it's entertaining. You're standing up for men.
So they're publishing about it.
Yes.
Okay.
If you're a potential advertiser, right, because you're seeing this and it's taking over the press, right, and it's getting a lot of it's a sort of cerebral, though ridiculous, thought, right? And so now,
and the petition was tied back to Maxim. Like, did it have they had branding on it very clearly?
Yes. It was like, this is all like, we're the interested party, we're the ones petitioning.
Okay, got it. So it was a branded activation.
Yes.
So it always tied back,
right, to get legislation through, and it was on the Maxim site, and the whole thing was so entertaining to read through. It was maybe like 7 or 8 pages, but I mean, there was like monster trucks and explosion and like ninja movies. It was so dumb, but then written like a scientist, right? And so it's building the brand, or shoring up the brand for current, for their current audience. It's showing blue chip advertisers, look, we're not just like, hey, here's scantily clad women. It's like, there's thought over here. Like, we're thinking about stuff in a different way. And so they started getting the blue chip advertisers to advertise in the magazine. And then finally, to your point, how is the brand and the product relevant? Well, it's a men's magazine, right? And this is where, these things aren't under assault. In fact, this is like, a game preserve, for men.
Right.
Like, and it did all those things. So it wasn't just doing it to be crazy,
Gotcha. I love it. And I'm thinking about B2B publishing ads and campaigns with breaking and entering, trying to get freaking sponsors. And I'm nowhere near that level of creativity. So definitely going to hit you up.
It's so great that you mentioned that, because I have always been astounded by, so B2B is like the default thing for agencies is, okay, we don't have to try as hard, right? Because it's B2B, or the work, or maybe we don't even do the work, or if we do, it's like we don't really apply ourselves the same way. And it's funny because it's like, who's at, it's business to business, but they're human beings on both ends. And the fact that also it's so easy to raise the bar because the bar is so low. So when you go in and you treat those, that human being at that other business, you need to captivate them, enchant them, entertain them, all in a strategic way, just as much as you would a consumer. And when you do that, like, oh my God, like, first of all, the people that work for the client you have, they're more proud of their job. They love what they do. You see the look on their face, because they've been let down so many times. And then lo and behold, it works. So that's exactly what you're saying. The B2B thing is huge. And we love that kind of work. I can also tell you the Coke Zero story if you want, because it is probably the craziest story. And I don't know if I'll get in trouble for saying some of this, but I'm not a deep pocket. So if they want to come and get me,
let's do it.
So here's the thing with Coke Zero. Coke Zero was launched in 2004. And by the way, I have a soft spot in my heart for the Coca-Cola company, even though, at times from a corporate perspective, it can be like a pit of vipers, I loved working with them. I loved the people. But it was not an easy process. So they're launching Coke Zero. The reason they're even making the product is they're losing guys. And you're a guy and you're drinking Cokes as a teen, if your parents will let you. And then, you start putting on weight as you get older and you realize I can't fire back 6 Cokes a day, right? But guys wouldn't switch to Diet Coke because Diet Coke was marketed almost like a handbag. It was so skewed feminine and fashion that it felt weird for a lot of guys to pick up a Diet Coke. So guys would switch to like Gatorade or beer. They had this research, which is hilarious to me. Beer. I'll just drink beers. Right?
Gatorade or beer. Those are 2 great liquids, but
and energy or sports drinks have as much sugar as so anyway, they didn't have anywhere to retain these guys, any product that would. So they come out with this product that tastes a lot more like regular Coke. And it's in a black can, and it's okay. Well, it seems like a layup, but here's the problem. There was a product called C2, and there was a product called New Coke, and those were monumental failures for the Coca-Cola company, to the point where the bottlers, which they didn't own yet at this point, and the retailers were like, we are not interested in the next mega brand from Coke. We've been burned. So fuck you, we don't want it. And so the beverage industry press predicted that we would be off the shelves, I think within like 6 months, which was really heartening when you're like setting out to try to launch something. Right. And
right.
The experts are like, oh, this thing is done. Right. And then also there's this minefield of, you kind of know, like from a vibe perspective, you don't want to be Diet Coke for dudes, right? Like and by the way, Pepsi did that, and they made Pepsi Max, and Pepsi Max failed spectacularly. So
remember Dr. Pepper 10?
Yeah. Like nobody wants tough guy diet soda, right?
Yeah, remember those ads? It's like they said in Dr. Pepper, it's like it's not for women.
Yeah, and it
was like weird, like jungle action.
Yes, I remember. Yes, and just trying so hard. And so what we realized is like, look, it's got to be something that women can drink and buy and not feel weird, but it can skew, neutral to male. So the biggest skepticism, and it was the simplest strategy ever, was it tastes like Coke. No one believed that, because at that time, all the artificial sweeteners were like, they tasted like hairspray. I don't know, like Diet Coke is weird compared to, some people love it, but nobody believed that a calorie-free thing could taste anywhere near like Coke. So all we did was we took that strategy, tastes like Coke, and we were like, what would happen in real life if that was true? If Coke Zero tasted exactly like Coke? And we're like, okay, it would cannibalize sales. Like, why would you drink the one that has all the sugar when you can drink the other one? There would be infighting. There are 4,000 employees at Coke's Atlanta headquarters alone. There might be more than that now, and not to mention globally. And so it would just be this shit show. It wouldn't be like wonderful. It would be like a disaster potentially, or at least there would be those elements. So we ended up coming up with this idea where Coke sues itself. So the Coca-Cola, and it's a very, it's a siloed company in some ways. So the Coke team because the sales are tanking, because, and wasn't true, but they're concerned, is going to go after the Coke Zero team legally. So Coke has 100 attorneys, like in their. Well, first of all, let me tell you what happened when I presented this. So that's the idea, right? And so I go to present it, and the woman I was presenting to was Mary Minnick. She was a very accomplished executive. I think she was number 2 globally with marketing and number 1 in North America. And everyone was terrified of her. They called her Scary Mary. That's the name of the person. Most of my clients had never presented to her, had never been in a meeting with her. I had a t-shirt on there, like, you can't wear a t-shirt. No one's ever presented to Mary in a t-shirt. I'm like, this is what I got. Plus,
this is
like,
awesome.
Look, like a button-down shirt is not going to fix this. Like, this is so. It was weird because she wasn't there. She was in Turkey, where Muhtar Kent, who was the number 1 person at Coke, was located. So it was like this. It was like a Zoom thing, but it wasn't Zoom. It was, but back then it was weird. It felt like I was talking to somebody on the International Space Station, right? And she comes up, and I present the work, and it's like, listen, this is, if you really want to get people to think it tastes the same, like, what could be more compelling than this? Like, it's creating problems, right? And she looks at me. It's the worst feedback I've ever gotten in my life. She says, this is all the feedback was, too. There was nothing but this. She said, well, I think this work is desperate and pathetic. Like, just that. And it was
okay.
like, holy shit. So I knew it was done. And I said, I didn't get contentious, but I said, respectfully, I actually think it's confident, because you're in a sense, you're making fun of yourself. And she's like, well, it's never going to run on my watch. Right. And that was the end of it. Well, there was a guy named P.O. Shunker, who was the head of creative excellence at Coke. And I will give him all the credit in the world, because at that time, no one cared what you put online. So he's like, you know what we're going to do? We're just going to put this online, which is a totally crazy move, right? And so we produced the work. We ended up, it was a full-on production. We had to sneak into Coke headquarters. I am not kidding you. Like, an entire production crew. And down in the bottom of this one building, they had these offices, these conference rooms. And we built one out with a 2-way mirror, and the Polycom device was a microphone. There were hidden cameras everywhere. And Coke has 100. This is how litigious this company was. And this is going back. This has happened in 2004. They had 100 attorneys that worked there, and their head attorney was in on this. So he was the only one that knew. And what we did was, we got 2 improv actors from, like, Second City and Groundlings, the feeder systems for Saturday Night Live. We got badges, Coke badges. They were Coke marketing executives. We got them phone extensions at Coke. We got the whole deal. And because there's 4,000 people there, in Atlanta, no one knows anyone. So, like, no one for a second thought these guys weren't real. And they show up, and they have these individual meetings with the attorneys at Coke. And they say, essentially, listen, would you agree these products taste the same? Yes. That's the problem. They've copied our taste. They never approached us about it. We want to bring aggressive legal action. And then, you can imagine the reactions. Like, the attorneys would be like, well, that's like suing yourself. And the guy would be like, well, they're on 3. They're on a different floor. And then, and some of the stuff, it was so, well, we wrote about half of it, and then the actors would improvise about half of it, and they never broke character. And it was so great. And so we had to move Video Village because we were laughing so hard it was coming through the wall.
Right.
And so anyway, we put the work online. And the funny thing is, do you know Whopper Freakout? Do you remember?
Yeah. I interviewed Rob Riley a couple weeks ago.
The funny thing about Whopper Freakout is, like, and it's obviously great work, but Whopper Freakout, I heard that the year that we put Zero TV and shows, because it was online for a year before we put it on TV, right? Because remember, it had been forbidden from ever running. And then eventually they're like, people are loving this shit. And we cut it into like 13 TV spots, right? Mary Minnick gets interviewed in Creativity about all the cool shit she's doing at Coke. And she's like, yeah, this is part of my vision. This work. And like, we didn't care. It's just like great that it got made. But I was going back to Whopper Freakout. I heard that year at the shows, people were like calling it Coke Zero Freakout because Whopper Freakout came first. Well, Whopper Freakout was like a year after this work was made. And so if anything was derivative of anything, it was the other way around. And about another year after this, I remember Alex had to say no more hidden camera ideas, right? Because like, and that happens, like something works and then everybody starts turning in shit and it's like, we're done with hidden camera work. But yeah,
so
the bigger point is it helped their business. It blew the product up. We had double-digit growth quarter over quarter for 7 straight years on this thing that was predicted to fail, and it was the best new product launch in Coca-Cola Company's history. Hey, who is that? What are you doing back there?
Yeah, that's Jack. Right. He can't hear you. Get the headphones on. It's our lawyer, actually.
Okay, he is. That guy was a lawyer. No. He looked like the Unabomber, dude.
Screwed.
Anyway.
Ted Kaczynski.
Yeah, totally. Anyway, the point is it was really successful for a strategic reason. It made you think, even though it's tongue in cheek, hey, this probably tastes more like Coke than I think. And it was a huge success for them, but it had such an unlikely road to being made. And I remember one comment that someone posted that I thought was so cool. And they said, in all the years that I've been following Coke, they've never spoken to me this way because it's polar bears and happiness and optimism and, and there's nothing wrong with that. But man, they pulled back the curtain and said, listen, we're a company, we're human, we have infighting, we have, we're not perfect. And the guy said that, and he's like, I appreciated that. So I think it created an affinity with people in a way that other work never had. So anyway, that's that stuff.
A lot of learnings in that. I'm curious now then, if people have more questions and they want to connect with you or follow Standard Practice, what would be the best way for them to do that?
It would probably be to reach out to the agency website, or like I'm on LinkedIn, but barely, not because I think I'm too good to be on it, but because as we said, I don't know if we were recording then, but I'm virtually incapable of using any form of I won't even call it modern. I'll call it 10-year-old technology. So yeah, but I'm on Instagram and, but also just, I think, through the website, if you reached out, that would be a good way to do it. 'Cause we do look at that stuff and I'm happy to, I love talking to people about stuff like this. And so, if anybody had more questions or wanted to know what was up, I'd love to talk to them.
Yeah, I see. So the website is www.standardpractice.us. hello@standardpractice.us is the email. So boom. Dave, amazing stories. I think there's so much to learn here. Those case studies. I'm going to go watch all the work. I suggest everybody take notes, re-listen to this. It's going to be great. I can't wait to see what you're up to with Standard Practice in the near future, but really, really appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you, Gino. And again, congratulations on having the most cluttered background that I've ever seen in a professional setting, because nothing says you're busy like that. Like, I can't even fuck with whatever's up there, paper towels, a basketball. We
took the door off our apartment, one of our bedroom doors, so the airflow can come in. And then we put a shoe rack on that door that's taken off. So it's efficient.
Crispin, as I told you, when I got there, when it was still small, that's what the office looked like. There was just shit everywhere. So if that's any indication, it would seem that you're on your way up.
Oh, I'm clipping that. Thank you so much.
All right.
All right, Dave. Take care. Have a great rest of your day.
You as well.